Hello everyone, welcome to the Penguin Coders. In this video, we will discuss about the SQLite database structure of our to-do list application, and we will make the database handler class for our to-do list application. So this is the fourth part of our tutorial, and if you want to see the previous parts, follow the link in the description. Okay, so continue to the tutorial, go to the Java folder and in that select the package net.penguincoders.doit, and inside that I'll create a new package and name it as utils. So I'll create a utils package, and here in the utils package I'll create a new Java class and I'll name it as database handler. So this database handler will handle all the adding, deleting or updating our task of our project. So continuing with the database handler. So we will be working with the default SQLite database which Android offers by default. So let me extend this class to extends SQLite helper. So SQLite open helper. Okay, now we need to write some variables. We need to define some variables. So I'll define those as private static final int version. So this defines the version of my database and I'll keep it by default as 1. And then I need to define more variables such as private static final string name, which will be my database name. So I'm defining these constants because it will be used everywhere, so I don't want to mess up the names, so I'll be defining these as constants. So the name of the database which I'll be keeping in my SQLite database will be ToDo list database. So ToDo list database. Let me actually copy this private static final because it will be used in almost everywhere. So Control C, Control V, and then we will define the table name. So string table name, the table name constant will be ToDo table equals ToDo. Then I'll define the ID. I'll define the column names which are ID. So this will be, I'll actually be storing all the values as strings only here because it becomes very easy while processing. So string task. Task is the actual text which we are going to store. So it will be stored as task column, the small one. Then we have the status. So it will be string status equals status. Then I'll be defining a query which I'll be using to create my database. So this will be named as create ToDo table. So this query is defined as create table and plus the name of the table. The name of the table is ToDo table. So plus we will be writing a comma. Actually, this is the whole query which we are SQL query which we are going to define as a string. Then we need to create ID object, ID as a parameter, and we will comma, and we will keep it as integer primary key, and we want to auto update our ID, so I'll keep it as auto increment. And then we will write a comma here and give a space, and let's continue it in the next line. So plus task plus this task is a text, so define it as text, comma, and the other things which we are going to define is status. Then we have comma here. Actually we don't require it, this is the last one. So status, and it's an integer, so because we are keeping the status as 0 and 1. And then I close the bracket and put a semicolon. So this is a create ToDo table constant. So okay, we haven't defined the string here, so string, yes. The data type should be string. Okay. Now I'll need to define some variables. So one is the private SQLite helper, SQLite database, SQLite database, and we'll keep it as DB. So this is actually the reference of the SQLite database which we are going to make, and we will write a constructor for our database helper class. So private database handler context, will pass the context here. So context. So we actually need to initialize the super class with the context. So super context comma name of the database, and then null. The cursor factory will be null, and then we will pass the version of our database. So we have our, okay, we need to import a context class, so alt enter, import class. Now we need to write the onCreate method. So I'll override this method, override public void onCreate. So onCreate, and we'll pass the SQLite database object here. So as a parameter. So I'll write the query to create a new table, so that while database is created, we have the table. So I'll write db.exec_SQL. So execute the raw SQL query. So the query which I want to write is, I want to create a to-do table. So I'll write it as create to-do table. Okay. So this completes my onCreate. Now I need to write onUpgrade method. So these are the default methods which are required by all database handler classes, which are part of our SQLite Open Helper class. So we will write public void onUpgrade SQLite database. We'll pass the database, and we will pass the old version here and the new version here, and new version. So what we want to actually do, we want to drop the to-do list table, so that on upgrading the database, we have a new table for that. So I'll drop a table, drop the existing tables, drop the older tables. So I'll execute a query called db.exec_SQL, and we will write here the query drop table if exists, and we will pass the table name. So the table name is to-do table, and then we will want to create the table again. So create tables again. So db dot, we will actually, instead of writing the exec SQL, we will write onCreate db. So we will call the onCreate method, which will create a new table for us. Now we need to write a open database method, so that we can actually work with the database. This method will be called in the activities which you are using. So for suppose, I'll be calling this method in my main activity. So public void open database. Now this will initialize the db object, db equals this dot get writable database, because we want to edit the database as well, update on it, and we want to do all the writable functions. So we'll open it as a writable database. Now we have to actually insert 4 tasks here. So first will be the insert task function. So public void insert task, and for the insert task, I'll pass a to-do model here. So actually I will pass the whole task, which will consist of 3 things: the text, the status, and the ID. We will not initialize the ID because it's already being auto incremented. So we will not use that, but we need to pass it. So we will store that as content values. So content values CV equals new content values, create a new class for it, new content values, and cv.put, we will put the task here, cv.put task, the constant value, which is this is the key, and the value we will get it from the task dot get task. So we'll get the string from here. Now cv.put, we need to get the status also. So because we are putting a new task, so status we can write it as 0 because initially any new task will be unchecked only. Now I need to insert this in my database, so I'll write a query for that, db.insert, and here we will write the table name, so ToDo table, and we will pass the null column hack as null because we want to insert the whole row in it. So and then CV, the content values. So content values is actually a very good method to initialize because we actually don't require the writing the raw SQL queries for it, and the content values actually does the part for that because we already have a insert method given to us. Why to write an raw SQL query? Then we will write a new function which is get all tasks. So this function will get all the tasks from our database and store it in our array list, which we will be sending it back to our main activity, and we will be showing that in the recycler view. So public list, and the type of the list will be of ToDo model because we will be sending the class objects here. So ToDo model get all tasks. Let me write that. First let me initialize a new empty array list. So list ToDo model task list equals new array list. Okay, now in this array list we need to get all the tasks and store it here. So we will define a cursor object for our database. Cursor cur equals null, initialize it with null. So if we have a large number of tasks to be returned and this function takes a lot of time to prevent any error in the database, we will actually write this whole line block of statements in a transaction. So let me write a db.begin transaction here. So this what it will do, then db.end transaction, and we will write our whole code between these. So suppose if we close the application while the task is being executed or the database task, if anything happens in between, nothing will be changed in our database, and we will be able to store the state of the database safely and not tamper with it. So this will be very helpful there. So let me write a try statement. Try cursor equals db.query. This is an inbuilt function here. So query, and we want to query it on our ToDo table, and we actually require everything. We don't require any column selection, nothing. We want to retrieve all the rows, everything. So I'll pass all the rest of the parameters as null. So null. Okay, a minute. Null. Then we have null. So group by having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have the rest of the parameters as null. Order by is null. Then we have limit is null. So what actually this will do? It will return all the rows from our database without any criteria, if anything exists. So we will check if cursor is not null. If cursor is not equal to null, suppose something has been returned here, then we will check if cursor is still on the first object, or we will move the cursor to the first row, move to first. Then I'll write here do, I'll create a new ToDo model object here. ToDo model task equals new ToDo model. Then task dot set ID. We need to get the ID from our cursor. So cursor dot get integer, and we will get it from cursor dot get column index, and the column name will be ID. So as you can see, the constants are coming very handy now. So task dot set task, and we will get it from cursor dot get string, then cursor dot get column index, then task, then task dot set status, cursor dot get int, then cursor dot get column index, and the column name is status. Okay, so this completes, like, we have all the variables of our task. Then we will add this task to our task list. So task list dot add this task. Okay, so do while we have our cursor. So cursor dot move to next. So while the cursor is not empty, this will run and we will have our task. Now after the try statement, we need to write a finally block. So in the finally, I'll move this db.intransaction here. So, and then we will close the cursor. So cur.close after the task is completed. So this completes our get all task function. Okay, in this get all task, we need to return this task list. So I'll return it here, return task list. Then we have the different tasks such as public void update status. Suppose you want to mark the task as checked or not checked. So I will have that update status. And here I'll be getting the ID of the task and the status value. So this I'll get it from the recycler view itself, because the recycler view currently will be having the ID as well as the status of the task which it wants to send, either checked or unchecked. So let me create a new content values object. Content values CV equals to new content values, and CV dot put, will put the status here, status comma status, and now we will need to update it. So db dot update, the update query asks for a table name. So I'll write the ToDo table name, and then the content values and string where clause. So in the where clause, I need to find my ID. So where ID equals ID plus equals, and then a question mark. Question mark is for formatting. Then we will format the new string. It takes an array. So string dot value of, convert the ID in a string and pass it here. So this will update the task, public void. Then we have update task if you want to update the text of the task here. So we will be getting the int ID and the string of our task. So the same, I can just copy it, the content values. I'll create a new object here, and in this content values, cv dot put task. Okay, now we need to update our database. So I'll write db dot update, pass the table name and the content values and the ID clause, where ID equals plus question mark, and here we will be passing same new string and string.value of ID. Now we have, if we want to delete a task, so we will write a function for that. So public void delete task, and we will be passing the ID of our task which we want to delete. So just the single SQL statement db.delete, the table name, ToDo table, and the where clause, where ID equals, actually it's ID plus equals. So ID plus and quotation equals question mark, and pass the ID in an array format, new string dot value of ID. So this will delete the task. So this completes our whole database handler, where we have written all the functions which we will be requiring in our application related to the database. So in the next video, we will be seeing how to apply these functions to the main activity, and we will be creating the actual application to add, update, and delete our tasks. So thank you guys, and if you have any queries, leave it in the comments. For more videos like this, you can subscribe to my channel. Thank you.